Okay, so let's get rolling here. Good morning, good afternoon to people who have joined from this part of the hemisphere. Before I start, a quick introduction from me. My name is Anup Surendran. I head up product and engineering at Question Pro. I'm responsible for product launches, roadmap, and product marketing here at Question Pro. Our focus today for the webinar is about survey design and less about the product itself. I will be helping moderating this webinar, and Greg is our speaker. I'm more than happy to introduce Greg. Hey, Greg.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon as well.
So Greg is a senior level insights and analytics professional. He has a background in the world of IT and the customer-centric domain of marketing, a pretty interesting combination. Currently, Greg is the Senior Research Director at Global Knowledge, where he leads the projects that includes conducting industry surveys, statistical analysis, qualitative research, and tracking brand awareness. He's also a partner with Anova Market Research. Greg possesses specific skills in marketing, research analytics, and strategy development for both acquisition and retention. Great. So, Greg, I'm going to go into the next slide here, set up some logistics for this webinar. So we have this hashtag for Twitter, hashtag survey design tips. I invite all of you to tweet questions, shout outs at this hashtag, even at questionpro.com, so at questionpro, which is the Twitter handle. We also have a widget within the GoToMeeting panel. So if you look within your GoToMeeting panel, you'll see a questions section where you can post questions, which I will be looking at, and I will be bubbling that up to Greg as we proceed. So Greg, I'm again happy to have you here. And
all right, Anup, thank you so very much. Everybody, I hope you guys are doing well and having a good week. Let's take a look at what's on today's agenda. How we're going to identify the need, if we need to even do a survey. Run one, how to design a survey that does what you want. Turning goals into real survey questions. Collecting answers to carefully crafted questions, and then finally turning those resources into insightful and actionable data. Okay. Let me see, I'm having a bit of trouble advancing the slide here. Okay, there we go. Let me back up just one here because this is important. In market research and in research in general, all is not what you see. Quite often our managers and people that we're talking to and doing our work for, both internal clients and external clients, will only see the problem itself. So that may be a decline in sales, it may be a decline in customer satisfaction scores. It's up to us as researchers to kind of dive underneath that top 10% perhaps and get to the root causes. There we go. So let's talk about identifying the need. Now, research itself does not live in a vacuum. We certainly can't thrive if we're put into a vacuum anyway. We do need to take a second and look below the surface. And to do that, we need to start off by querying our clients in order to understand what is known. In a sense, we're in the business of asking questions. We're a bit like a business therapist, if you will. Not only do we craft survey questions to ask our respondents, ultimately, but we also need to be forthright in the questions we ask our clients, and that's both internal and external as well. So take a moment when preparing for that initial client meeting, make sure you have in your notes questions regarding the nature of the problem as they see it and understand it. And that should include their gut feelings, because really in research we're in the business of quantifying gut feelings. So we need to know what their gut tells them, and as well as any relevant information about their business operation in which you might not already know. we have to have as good an understanding of our client's business as we can in order to leverage that out into the field in terms of primary research. So it all starts with a plan, and this flow chart comes from our good friends at Research Rockstar, so just a shout out to them. But the key point I'd like to reiterate here as we look at this flow chart is that before survey design can even begin, we have to know who we're speaking to, and that drives our sampling plan, and what the overarching research questions are that we plan to answer. Now, these are not specific survey questions. These are the big picture questions that our clients need to have answers to. This will inform our data analysis plan, which then in turn informs our survey plan. So one of the things I also want to point about this flowchart is that it's iterative. Seldom will a survey be created in a single shot. You need to allocate time in your project schedule for revisions and making sure that you've got the client's big picture questions ready to be answered before we throw the survey out into the field. Let's ask ourselves a quick question. Do we really need a survey? Research in general, there's two divisions here. There's secondary research and there's primary research. Now, secondary research on occasion will fulfill your information needs. However, it does have limitations. And that main limitation is namely the work was designed to meet someone else's agenda. So with that said, if budget permits, secondary research can be very useful in informing your own primary project. For example, secondary analysis can uncover trends which may be driving the market changes that you're seeing, thus helping shed light on the portion of that iceberg that's below the ocean. You might just also find key metrics and key questions, which you may use to benchmark against the data that you collect or survey. So secondary research, again, can be less costly in terms of time and budget, and you're leveraging the work of other analysts. So if you're a one-person shop, immediately your team becomes bigger. On the downside, it was designed to meet someone else's research needs and may not directly address those areas that are of concern to you. On the other side of the coin is primary research, and that's research that we design and we direct. Again, it comes from the perspective of being able to directly answer your research questions. It also gives you the maximum flexibility for data analysis. You're not limited to just the data generated by somebody else. On the downside, they cost more. Invariably, a primary project will cost more than strictly doing secondary research, and that is in terms of both time and budget. So why do you want to run a survey? Now, a survey project, and this may sound conflicting, but a survey project shouldn't always be your first option. If your other sources don't provide the information you need, then, and only then, is it time to create a structured project that will allow you to obtain the necessary. But by this point, you've done your due diligence. You've looked at online secondary research. You may have looked at published reports. You may even have gone back to your existing in-house data. And if that does not allow you to answer the questions that you need to answer, then it becomes time to construct a survey. Now, research in general, market research in particular, has traditionally been divided into two main camps, if you will. One is qualitative, one is quantitative. They each have their strengths and weaknesses. I'm going to take a look at qualitative first. Results from qualitative work can certainly be used to create a more effective survey if they're conducted prior to you actually launching the survey. Qualitative work is again, fantastic for that deep dive perspective. You might think of it as color commentary, if you will. And within the arena of qualitative, you have your traditional focus groups. You even now have online focus groups. In-depth interviews, that's where the researcher and the individual respondent are talking one-on-one. And also popular now are bulletin boards. This category would also include mobile ethnography, those projects where you ask people perhaps to upload a picture of them doing something or a product they're considering. It provides a depth of information that you just cannot get from a survey. That's why I like to think of it as color commentary. Now, it can be used both in advance of a project to help you create a better survey, because you've got a deeper level of understanding of the pain points or the issues in the market. It can also be used on the backside. If you find something in your survey that's particularly insightful or exciting and you want more depth to it, you can certainly ask people post hoc, if you will, to elaborate on the responses. Now, the primary downside of qualitative, and as much fun and as creative as qualitative can be, the main issue with it is it cannot be projected onto the large market. Qualitative studies typically are not, they're not random in nature, they're very small, and you just don't want to take the results and say that's the gospel, if you will, and we're going to apply this to broader market. What you can do with qualitative is you can take it over to better help design and craft your quantitative project. Now, on the quantitative side, we've got surveys, we've got data mining, and particularly looking at sales transactions or looking at online transactions, looking at tweets and things out in the universe there. You also have forecasting. All of this rolls up into the quantitative side of the house. And depending on the sampling methods that you use, results from the quantitative can be projected out into the broader market. So that's the advantage of that. Both of these tend to work together, they complement each other, and they certainly can help you as a researcher create a stronger case for your research.
Greg, we do have a question from the audience.
Yes.
The question is around secondary research and qualitative together. So the question really is it worthwhile not making qualitative research in-house, or doing qualitative research in-house and using agencies or market research agencies to do qualitative research? What are your recommendations and suggestions there?
Recommendation there is definitely qualitative research is a specialty in and of itself, and I would definitely consider employing an outside agency for qualitative work. Trust me, a good focus group moderator, they're hard to find, and they're valuable in their insights and their ability to extract information from folks. So I would definitely consider engaging an agency for qualitative. Now, as part of that partnership, you're certainly going to be sharing information back and forth, and you may actually be behind the screen, if you will, watching the focus groups or listening in and moderating to the moderator online. So you will definitely be involved, but I would also strongly recommend, unless you have background in qualitative, unless you've done it for a while, and there are training programs for it, but in absence of that, I would recommend going with an agency.
I think it did answer Tim's question. He says okay, so
excellent, excellent. So let's talk about designing a survey that works. Anoop and I were speaking earlier that it's amazing in this day and age that you still see surveys that are poorly worded, poorly crafted. They're difficult to get through. One of the things I've heard in the past is that clients want 40 minutes of a respondent's time, but respondents may only be willing to give a fraction of that. So it's our job as researchers to listen to what the client's needs are and to balance that out with the respondent's willingness to share. To do that effectively, to design that effective survey, we have to know a few things. We have to know who we're going to be speaking to. Who is our intended audience? If we're talking to IT professionals, which is something I do quite frequently as part of Global Knowledge, then I need to know what's important to IT professionals. I need to be current in the lingo, if you will. If I'm talking to mothers of young children, again, we need to know our audience. We need to be able to structure our questions to meet those audiences and to kind of create a one-on-one relationship, if you will. We need to, on the other side of that coin, is know what our overarching research questions are that need to be answered. Again, this might be the sales manager that comes to you and says our sales are down. This might be the customer service manager that is seeing their CSAT scores, if you will, decline over time. So we need to have an idea of what those overarching research questions are. And lastly, we need to be able to take those two sometimes competing needs and balance them out in an effective survey. And an effective survey truly does that. It balances the informational needs of the client while respecting the respondent's time and willingness to share their opinions. I'm always honored when someone who is not receiving an incentive takes time to answer one of my surveys. So we need to sort of be the guardian of that relationship between the respondent and not allow the client, or excuse me, let me rephrase that, guide the client, if you will, into a position where they too can understand that a respondent's time is precious to them, and that what we're after here is good quality data, and ultimately that's what we need to make decisions with. So it's our job as the researcher to design that survey that balances those needs. Let me talk a little bit now about survey flow. And what do we mean by survey flow here? Surveys themselves have distinct blocks, and the purpose of those blocks is they're designed to guide the respondent through the process. For example, respondents who do not meet screening criteria, in other words, they're not who we want to talk to, they will be exited out. Non-purchasers, for example, another example, may be sent down one branch, if you will, while purchasers are sent down another. And this is where it becomes important. The judicious use of survey logic, skip logic, branch logic, display logic, whatever you may call it, is it ensures that questions are appropriate for the type of respondent you're speaking to. A good example, I have a wife and 2 daughters, and I have personally purchased feminine hygiene products, so I have purchase intent, but I have no idea about usage. This is the kind of situation where knowing who your respondent is and then using logic will help put the question sets in front of people that they can realistically answer. Keep this in mind, surveys are like a tree in that they have branches, and this is where that logic comes into play. So let's take a look now at these blocks individually. First, we always should have an introduction to the survey, and what this does is it sets the respondent's expectations. Now, this may also be covered in your survey invitation, and you may simply use the introduction to reiterate a few points. Some of the things we need to make sure that we do our best at doing, and that is to give a realistic time estimate for the survey duration. What this does is it gives the respondent, again, that realistic expectation. It also reminds them that their opinions are secure. You may choose to remind them to answer truthfully. There's a few other things we can do in the introduction, but it sort of sets the table, if you will. The second block we have in the survey are screeners. Now, typically, screeners include demographics. This might be age, gender, region. Might be level of responsibility or purchasability in a B2B situation. You might also have product or service usage, brand or company awareness. These are typical screeners, and screeners are used for making sure that the right people that we want to talk to actually pass into the survey. They're also very useful for feeding quotas if we have quotas established. Next, we have the body of the survey, and this is really the bulk of the survey, if you will. This is where we're going to be putting our questions on attitudes and usage, awareness, concept testing, competitive perceptions, etc. will flow into the body of the survey. Then I like to kind of wrap things up, if you will, starting that downhill decline into the demographics. Now, these will be the questions that we want to use for profiling or segmenting the respondents. Now, there's no need to repeat any demographics that we may use as screeners. Then I think it's nice to close with a final thought, and this would be closing with an open-ended question, asking for any additional thoughts. And last but not least, we have redirects. And what is a redirect? That could be a simple thank you page, thanking them for the response. It could be an automatic redirect to your website if you're looking at promoting yourself that way, or it could be back to the panel provider if you're working with a panel provider. Okay,
Greg,
now we're
just
going to,
before you move on, there was a comment from the crowd around, couldn't that redirect the page to an incentive if you had promoted an incentive? Or a gift card?
Indeed. When it comes to incentives, if there's some legalities around incentives, we're not going to touch on those today, but I typically like to inform people early in the survey, either in the invite and or the introduction, that there's an opportunity for an incentive. And then at the end of the study, I typically give them the opportunity to opt in to that incentive. I want them to know that they don't have to, but if they wish to participate, then check a box that says yes, and then I will typically ask them for their current contact information. So we can do a random draw and then notify those winners. So that typically will come as the last portion of the survey. And you can actually do that, that incentive portion of the survey, prior to a redirect or a thank you page. Okay, let's take a look at some questions here. We do have several types of questions that we can employ in our survey. The go-to question, or the workhorse, if you will, is a single select. Here you're asking your respondent to select a single category, such as how did you learn about this webinar? And they select one of those choices. Now, you're going to hear me talk about category lists a lot, and the things about category lists you want to know is you want to keep them as brief as possible, preferably 5 to 9 items, although that can vary at times. You want to randomize those lists in order to prevent bias, unless the list is alphabetical in nature, such as states, or IT certifications, or vendors, or ranged options such as age and or income. You can use drop-down lists, particularly if you are short on space or short on visual space. Drop-down lists can be very handy there. One thing you want to do anytime you have a list is to include an other please specify where it's appropriate. That simple action allows people that may have another option in mind to give you that option, so they don't feel like they're being ignored by not having the option available. And it also allows you to keep your lists fresh. If you start to see consensus building about another topic that's being mentioned frequently, you may wish to pull that in your list. So lists should not be static. They should continuously be reviewed for their appropriateness. Next on the list, and this happens to be, I think, one of my favorite question types. It's the multiple response, also known as the select all that apply, or multi-punch if you're in the programming side of the house. What we're asking here to a respondent to do is to select all options that apply from a category list, such as why did you attend this webinar? Select all that apply. Same category rules apply. Keep them as brief as possible. Randomize them. Remind respondents that they can select all if they feel they truly need to. It's also good to include categories for none, or none of these that apply, and the other please specify. Now, the really cool thing about multiple response questions is that they can serve as a really good feeding tool into some other types of questions, such as a single select, a rank order, or a constant sum. I like to use multiple response questions as sort of give me the broad mindset, and then I frequently take the ones that they select and put that into a question that says, okay, now tell me what is your most important? What is your preferred pizza topping, or which brand do you have the most experience with? So multiple response do a very nice job at feeding into other question types. Lastly, one thing to consider about multiple response is that each category is its own question. So each one is essentially a yes, no, a 0 or a 1. You can sum all of these up, sum all of the ones that were selected in the analysis phase, and it sort of gives you a poor man's segmentation. I've done that quite frequently. It works out really, really well.
So Greg, there are a couple of questions,
Yes.
actually quite a few questions popped up. Some of them directed towards the product itself. I know we didn't talk about the product yet, but it's worthwhile talking about them right now instead of bundling them towards the end of the webinar. For the question from Mace Carroll, the question is there a way to add a unique identifier to the participant so that you can link it to a future survey? Now, if I talk on behalf of Question Pro, yes, this feature is available. You can assign links, whether it's a survey or whether it's if it's a chained survey, so that feature is already there, or if it's a specific survey which is based on certain criteria, that's all available within Question Pro. So that's a Question Pro answer. Is there anything else you want to add there, Greg, in terms of design practice around surveys around?
Generally, yes. If you're working with in-house files, let's say a customer file, you should definitely assign a unique identifier, reference ID of that case. And the beautiful thing about that is if you have data that you've already collected, such as transactional data or data first purchase or demographics, you do not need to ask those questions in the survey if you have the ability to link them to a database. You can always merge survey data with database data in your analysis phase, thus making the survey a little bit shorter, a little bit easier on the respondent.
Perfect. The next question here from Kwame Charles is he does not understand the exact difference between the screeners and the demographics section of the demographics block you mentioned. Right?
A screener, again, essentially, if you picture a big gate, which either lets you in or it does not. The screener questions, that's the purpose they serve. It could be demographics. It may be something as simple as, have you used a purchase or have you purchased from a particular company in the past 6 months? Yes, no. And if they select no, then they may be screened out. The screeners, again, are a subset of the rest of the questions in the survey, a small subset that you use to identify the people that you truly want to speak to. The screeners may include age and gender, if those variables are relevant to who you're speaking to. They may include a usage question or an awareness question or two, if again those are useful. So screeners are a small subset. Their sole purpose is designed to serve as a gatekeeper to make sure that you get people that are truly qualified entering into your survey.
Good. Question specific for the product or directed towards me is comes from Daryl Naidu. Does Question Pro offer additional services to its clients whereby they are able to provide assistance to their clients regarding survey design? The answer is yes. It comes under a professional services agreement. If you have any requirements in terms of survey design, please reach out to our support and customer success team members, and they will be more than happy to help you with that. Next question from Matt Craig. I think a lot of people have already asked this question. It's around if these slides are going to be available. The answer is yes. You will see an email after this webinar and on our blog around published slides and the video itself. I'm going to pass it on to you, Greg, so that we continue your flow.
Excellent. Getting back to question types, we've talked about single select, we've talked about multiple response. Now we're going to get into a section where the questions are a little bit more complex. These are questions that you typically see in the body of your survey. Matrix or grid questions are useful for deploying Likert style questions or questions such as ratings, strongly agree to strongly disagree. These common questions are seen typically in a grid. The items for consideration are going to be in your rows, and whatever rating scale you're using, again, strongly disagree to strongly agree might be 1, those would be in the columns. Now some keynotes here. Keep your item list as brief as possible. Again, the old 5 to 9 rule of thumb here applies. If you're rating more items, then I would suggest that you consider formatting your list into multiple grid questions. Definitely randomize the items, that is the rows, to prevent order bias. And if you have multiple grids, and if your platform allows you to randomize the blocks, if you will, do that as well. Now, something I'm a firm believer of, and this comes from my days in database marketing at the Los Angeles Times, is the use of A/B testing. You can apply this concept to testing scale direction. From typically in the US anyway, we think low to high, strongly disagree to strongly agree, 1 to 7. That's how we typically look at things. However, that may not be the case in international settings. They may, or it may come directly from the client, for example, that they want to see the highest or the best rating to the left and the lowest or the worst rating to the right. So strongly suggest you test that to see if there's any differences in scores. Matrix or grid questions can be created side by side. So if you're assessing both importance and satisfaction, you can do those concurrently. Now, scale questions, and I want you guys to think about this, can be such as, what's this feature's importance to your purchase decision? They can be subjective. More often than not, I have seen cases of people or respondents that say everything is very important. And what that does to you as the researcher and as the analyst, it really ties your hands in your ability to determine which of those features truly is the most important. So if you're going out into the field and that is one of your major research questions, then I would suggest considering rank order, constant sum, or even something like max diff to minimize that subjective bias. And I believe we've got some visual examples here of what different types of matrix or grid questions here. We have both satisfaction and in this case usage. Again, this is a good example of a side-by-side matrix question. In this lower example, we have brands here at the top, Apple and Dell. We have a rating scale of bad to good. Then we have the various features that we're assessing. So again, very good examples of matrix and grid questions. Let me talk a little bit about rank order. Rank order is one of these questions that is certainly less subjective because the respondent actually has to sit down and assess what you're asking and either assign a numerical rating and or use drag and drop, if you will, to move the items around. Rank order does require that the respondent order their selections in terms of some metrics such as preference or importance. The usual suspects in terms of list size and randomization do apply. Now the source data for a rank order question, as I mentioned earlier, could be from a multiple response. It's really nice to tie a multiple response question into a rank order. That way you can get the broad perspective that the multiple response gives you, and you can also narrow that down via the rank order. It creates ordinal data. It is less subjective than scales questions, and you can leverage drag and drop, which is a wonderful visual engagement tool. However, I would not advise that for mobile design. So if you're going mobile, I would avoid the drag and drop. Constant sum, what else can I say? You're asking the respondent to allocate points to add up to typically 100, but they don't always have to be. They could be other bases as well. Same advice about list size does apply. Randomization, definitely important here as well. Source data can be from another question, such as a multiple response. And I found that constant sum works really, really well when it's tied to a numeric question, such as the amount spent during the last shopping trip. It allows you then to kind of take that data and do some wonderful analytical tools around it. It creates metrics data, which you can then use for more sophisticated analysis, such as regression or factor analysis, cluster analysis, if you will. So constant sum, adding up to 100 as well. Let's talk about image choice questions. This is one of the coolest aspects of online surveys is you have the ability to put an image in front of someone. And not only an image, but that could also be an audio recording, such as a radio ad. You can ask the respondent to then select which is their most preferred, or have them do rating, but they can actually physically see something that you want them to rate. Point of note here is do make sure that the images are clear. Test them on various devices to make sure they can be seen effectively. But image choice is great for testing logos, getting feedback on images in general. Open ends. There's a lot of debate around open ends. Basically, you're asking the respondent to give you their own thoughts in their own words. Now, they do tend to come in a few different flavors. Everything from a short contact information form. You have the short response. Think of the other please specify as a good example of that. And then you have the long format, such as do you have any suggestions for improving our future webinars? Now, there's a debate about whether or not they should be required and where to place them in the survey flow. It's my personal preference to leave them not required if they are in the form of additional thoughts, such as the one we see before us here. Set them to required if they're an integral part of the plan, such as contact information. If that's needed and that's expected, then set that to be required. Now, when it comes to open ends, I see them as being safe to use anywhere in the survey. Once you've gotten through those screeners, they're safe to use just about anywhere. I'm going to move through this pretty quickly here. Advanced question types. I know as a platform, Question Pro is really good about offering you some serious, hardcore advanced questions, and that might be something as relatively benign as the Net Promoter Score. It's always nice to have that preset up for you. You can adjust pricing questions using their Van Westendorp model. If you need to get into discrete choice or max diff, if you have use cases for those, they have a conjoint model section. You can also do some wonderful things with heat mapping, which is ideal if you're testing visual imagery, such as a magazine cover or a web page, a home page, for example, and using that heat map to see what draws people's attention. So there's some amazing advanced question types here. Each one of these could be a webinar unto itself, but just know they are available to you. Formatting considerations. Let's talk briefly about this. And again, since these slides are going to be coming to you, I'm not going to dwell too long on this because I know we need to be conscious of time, but lists versus drop-downs. Questions involving categories, both single or multiple select. You can present them either as a visible list, which tends to lower or lessen the cognitive load, or you can put them in a drop-down, which tends to minimize the amount of visual clutter, if you will, that's on a page. So the key here is to be consistent in your use and not mix formatting types on the same page if you can avoid it. Branded versus blind. Hey, surveys are communications, just like your websites and your emails, and they should make use of your accepted brand standards, unless you're doing competitive intelligence work. Anytime you go out and ask somebody to rate your brand compared to others, you want that survey to be blind. You don't want them to necessarily know who it's coming from. You would not want to use colors or anything that could be easily identified with your brand. Number of questions per page. It really comes down to a matter of scrolling versus clicking. My suggestion there is keep your number of questions per page to a reasonable number, 1 to 4 being reasonable. Now, some survey designers prefer the single question per page, but with drop-downs, you can certainly move beyond that. However, keep your eye on visual clutter. The last thing you want to do is put a survey out there that is very cluttered. You want to keep it as clean as possible. Fonts, select fonts that are going to be visible across multiple devices. Typically, that would be sans serif fonts such as Arial or Helvetica. They tend to look better, particularly in smaller sizes than fonts such as Times Roman. Use of space. It is acceptable to leverage visual space in survey design. If anything, it gives a bit of a break and it reduces that cognitive load faced by the respondent. And you can accomplish this in a couple of ways. You can limit the number of questions per page, as we suggested. You can use pages that provide a mental break. For example, a text slide or a visual slide that comes up and thanks the respondent for their participation so far and lets them know that they're almost done. So that mental break is nice to use, particularly if you're dealing with complex issues in your survey. Lastly, text. Hey, leverage section headings, particularly when you're shifting survey blocks. This gives the respondent a visual cue that the nature of the questions is changing. And descriptive text is called for when the process requires the respondent to have a deep focus, such as considering product scenarios. Just remember one thing, keep them as brief as possible. Okay, I know I'm running short on time, so mobile, things you need to know, readability. Keep your scales to a shorter number of points, 3 to 5 points, if you will, to avoid the need to pinch or zoom. Clickability. Hey, it's a lot easier to click with the mouse than with your thumb, so be generous here when sizing your response buttons. And loadability. Keep your images smaller and use fewer of them to reduce the amount of time it takes for an image to load, for a page to load. Now with mobile, you can actually get away with using more questions per page. That'll reduce the amount of time it takes to load. And with mobile, scrolling is a more accepted way of doing things, so you can actually have more questions per page. But with mobile, keep it as simple as possible.
Hey, Greg, a couple of
Yes.
questions related to mobile that'll bring it up right now. A question from Dennis Veninger. So question here is, would you have to make the determination ahead of time that the survey is designed for mobile? Or would you just not use a certain type of question should they not work on a mobile device? I have an answer, but I want you to take a jab at
Well,
this.
yeah, I think we have to be conscious to designing for mobile. I mean, at this stage of the game, anecdotal evidence will tell you that the percentage of online survey responses coming from the smartphone is in the range of 30 to 40% and increasing. But we also know that from the same research that survey dropout rates for mobile are 2 to 3 times higher. So you're going to need to, if you're talking specifically to mobile people, you're going to need to recruit more of them if you want a balanced sample between mobile and tablet or PC. Platforms, I know nowadays, several of them out there, will allow you to view it both as a mobile and as a tablet or PC. So that allows you to kind of get that visual before you go out. But I think there's some serious design considerations and thoughts that you need to put into your survey if you anticipate mobile as being a significant response. Again, the readability, clickability, and loadability are most important there. But I want to caution you as well. There's certain types of questions such as discrete choice or max diff exercises that really are best done on a PC or tablet. I would encourage you not to be afraid to suggest or even require that a survey be taken on a PC or tablet if it means producing a better user experience.
Good point, Greg. I just wanted to add in from a platform standpoint, Question Pro, for people who haven't used it, has a feature when you preview your survey, you can actually tab in and look at how this survey will perform in different landscapes or different devices from a user experience standpoint. So that's a feature we have. It's highly used, and we have received amazing feedback around that feature. And going back to your point, Greg, around discrete conjoined analysis or max diff, what has happened in the field based on feedback, especially with Question Pro, is that we have designed a native experience because it's, as you pointed out, it's not very friendly with an HTML rendering. We have a native experience with our offline app, which actually has conjoined, and we're the only only company currently, as far as I know, which has this feature on an offline capability. Just letting you know, letting the audience know.
Yeah, and I would add to that one more thing. When you optimize survey design for mobile, what that truly means is paying greater attention to how the questions are asked. You have to keep things short and simple. Some of the best mobile surveys I've seen were only 2 or 3 questions, and they were simple in nature. So keep that in mind if you're going mobile. You just want to make sure that the respondent experience is a good one, so they don't drop out as they're prone to do. Want to wrap things up with traps, things to avoid, tricks and traps here. Managing time is perhaps one of the biggest failures upon the part of researchers. We need to respect the respondent's time. When you don't, it leads to poor data quality, it leads to missing data, and it leads to the inability to draw valid conclusions from your survey data. The goal here is to keep your surveys as short as possible, given your research goals. 10 to 15 minutes is a reasonable time frame. Now, if you incorporate something like gamification into your survey, you can actually extend that limit, because research currently shows that highly engaged respondents tend to underestimate the amount of time that they spend with the survey. So you can stretch that, but do keep the respondent in mind. Consider the time that they give you as precious. We want to avoid leading the respondent. Just like a lawyer would be admonished by the judge for leading a witness, our questions should not include our own personal bias. Nowhere is this more relevant than when we address sensitive topics such as finances, politics, recreational drug use, things of this nature that are sensitive. We need the respondent on there. Keep your personal bias out of it, and that will help the data reflect the opinions of the respondents and not yourself. Double-barrel questions. Good example of that. Was your salesperson knowledgeable and courteous? Well, knowledgeable and courteous should be broken into 2 questions. So avoid double-barrel questions. Keep your focus on one topic at a time, if you will. Insensitivity is a trap I want you to avoid. Now, if your survey does address sensitive topics, again, that's politics, sexuality, alcohol use, etc., religion, finances. These questions are best placed toward the end of the survey. It's also advised that you test these questions, if you're dealing again with sensitive topics, with your colleagues and perhaps with a small number of respondents to ensure they understand what you're asking about. So be sensitive there. Overlapping categories. Oh, how many times have we seen this one? If you're working with numeric categories such as income, age, usage, etc., make sure each category is discrete and that they do not overlap. Otherwise, respondent is going to say, well, which category do I select if you have overlapping? So avoid overlapping categories. Another trap to avoid is thinking small. Hey, the level of granularity in your data directly affects what you can do with that data in the analysis side. If you're working with range categories, think of income, age, or amount spent. It's better to go bigger than it is smaller, because you can always collapse categories down during data analysis. You cannot go that way in reverse. Make sure you have an other please specify, a not applicable, or prefer not to state in your questions where appropriate. The latter being particularly useful in income questions. It's better to have someone select one of these categories and skip the question altogether or give you false data. Failure to follow up. Hey, don't be afraid to probe the respondent for additional insight. Leverage that open-ended question after your Net Promoter Score question, and use logic to make sure you're directing an appropriate question to each one of the 3 NPS groups. Lastly, death by grid. Nobody likes to complete a lengthy 10, 15, 20 item grid. Keep those grids as succinct as possible. If necessary, break them into multiple grids. This will help you to avoid problems such as straight lining or speeding through where they're not even looking at the questions. You may also want to include in your grid some negatively oriented questions to kind of slow the respondent down a bit. But these are some of the key traps that if you avoid, will help you create a survey that is both effective, that meets your internal client's needs, and gives you the kind of data that you need to analyze and have available to you. I want to say thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you to Anoop and for Question Pro for having me.
Thanks a lot, Greg. We do have a couple more questions, and before I go and start choosing these questions, we do have quite a few which we won't be able to answer by the end of this webinar since we are running out of time. But just to reiterate, Greg, I mean, your overall overarching message here is to find the right intersection, the right balance between user experience and information needs, so that you can always keep the respondent in mind and make sure we design great surveys. Is that a fair overarching comment?
Definitely a fair assessment. I mean, we as researchers are put right in the middle and have to balance the needs of our clients, the people that we serve and that perhaps pay us, with the needs of the respondent. There's no need to let one side or the other abuse each other. So keep a balance, keep the client's informational needs at hand, and keep the respondent's trust and willingness, and that'll help increase your completion rates. It'll help complete or increase just the responsiveness that you get from the respondent if you keep them in mind.
Excellent, excellent. So I'll go straight into the questions here. A question from Krishna is, the question goes, what is the appropriate statistical analysis for multi-response question? What would you suggest?
For a multiple response question, you can do frequency counts. Typically, if you're working with a program such as SPSS, you can create multiple response sets, and then you can flow those into crosstabs. So you're looking at a chi-square. If you've got, do males versus females have different preferences for pizza toppings? So you can do. You can certainly do multiple response. You can do crosstabs with them, which would leverage the chi-square statistic. Multiple response questions also tend to flow very well into latent class analysis. If you're familiar with that, that's a wonderful probabilistic segmentation type program. But generally, keeping it simple would be frequencies and crosstabs with multiple response data.
Perfect, perfect. The next one here probably would be the last one. We do have a couple more which will not be addressed, like I mentioned earlier, which we will take care of in a blog post later in the day or tomorrow. This question is from Paul Walsh, and the question is, should we avoid open comment or open text questions on mobile devices?
That's an excellent question, Paul, and they are going to be more difficult. If you're going to use them, I would say make sure the other questions that you're using are relatively short and succinct. Not my preference to put open-ended questions in mobile, but if you do, keep it short and maybe limit it to one or two at the moment.
Great. I think we are wrapping this session up. Thanks again, Greg. Amazing webinar as usual. And what will happen next steps here is you see our contact information. If you have any direct queries, you can reach out to Greg or myself related to product. And we will have a wrap-up email which will contain the links to the slide, the link to the YouTube video around this webinar, and that will be mailed to all the attendees shortly. Thank you again, and have a happy Wednesday, if it's still a Wednesday in your time zone. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.